All right, go ahead and pull up a CHRO job description. Oh, wait. And what you're going to find is a list of requirements that made sense back in 2005. HR expertise, employee relations, benefit administration, maybe a line about being a strategic partner. But that job description is not describing the role that the business actually needs. And what we're seeing is the businesses who are winning right now, they're the ones that are navigating AI, the org redesign, and workforce transformation, not because they have a head of HR, it's because they have an architect sitting in the people function. Welcome to the channel. I am Trent Cotton, the human capitalist. I've noticed that there's a big difference between HR business practices and how business actually gets done. I've spent over 20 years in HR helping the C-suite rebuild their organization while the world around them shifted. I've designed this channel to be an intelligence briefing on the business of people. So, if you're a CEO, board member, or a CHRO looking for the signal in the noise, welcome to the channel. Now, let's get to work. All right, welcome back to the Modern CHRO mini-series. This is episode 2. And in this series, I'm making the case of the traditional CHRO, the one that's been defined for, hired for, and evaluated, is becoming obsolete. Now, the role is not becoming obsolete because people strategy just no longer matters. It's because the version of the role that the most organizations are running is built for a world that no longer exists. The modern CHRO has to operate across 5 very distinct personas in order to survive and to lead: the architect, the engineer, the scientist, the COO, and the coach. And in this episode, I want to talk about the persona that is the architect. So if you look at, let's just say, over 80% of the CHRO roles, they were built on the assumption of what the business needs from HR, things like policy management, compliance, headcount planning, and employee relations. And that job was to keep the people engine running and stay out of trouble. It was more risk mitigation. And that served its time, but we're starting to see the needs and the desires and the expectations of the CHRO role change rapidly. And look, most CHROs, they know HR deeply. They know their team, their systems, and their metrics. What they don't know is what the business is quietly demanding, and that is that they understand every room and how all those rooms work together. And that's the gap, and it's getting very expensive every day that passes. Now, let's look at what the data actually says about why this is happening now and why it's happening so fast. The ground is quietly shifting under the CHRO role at a pace that organizations just aren't ready for. And let's face it, AI is the accelerant. Now, get this. In 2023, Gartner ran a survey. 19% of HR leaders said that they were in advanced stages of implementing generative AI or Gen AI. Now, by early 2025, that number was up to 61%. That is a 3 times jump in just 2 years. And we all know that it's not slowing down. Gartner also found that 82% of HR leaders plan to deploy agentic AI. Now, that's the autonomous type of AI, and they're planning to do it within the next 12 months. Fast forward 5 years, Gartner projects that 50% of current HR activities will be automated or performed by some type of an AI agent. And 60% of HR work tasks will be completed through an AI driven interface. So half of what HR does today will be automated or transformed beyond what we can see today. So stop and think about what that means for a CHRO whose role is just defined by running the HR function. If the function is sort of running itself, what's the case for the role? Well, the brutal answer is there's not one, at least for the traditional side of HR. So the urgency is real, the investment is real, and what's happening is the results aren't there yet. And again, it's not a tech problem, it's also a people problem. The organizations who are navigating this well are not the ones with the most AI tools because let's face it, AI is not a Midas touch. What we're finding is that the most successful organizations have a CHRO who can design the workforce strategy around these realities, not react to them after it's already happened. And that's why we need to talk about the architect persona. So before we get into the architect mindset or persona for the CHRO, I want to show you what that mindset actually looks like because the best way to explain it is to start with an actual architect. So let's think about what an architect actually has to do before a single piece of product or steel is put into the ground. They're not thinking about what the lobby looks like or picking furniture. They're asking some pretty intense questions like, what's the load capacity of this site? Are there any kind of zoning constraints? If we add a floor later, what does that do to the foundation? And what happens to the east side of the building whenever the afternoon sun hits in July? The architect has to hold the entire system in their head simultaneously because everything is connected. They can't optimize one room at the expense of the entire building. And not only is it complex, but every decision is a trade off. And the great architects, they make those right trade offs before anyone ever sees the problem coming. And that requires judgment, not knowledge. And don't forget, there's also a time dimension in there. Buildings aren't designed just for the first day or the first year, they're designed to absorb change over decades, new tenants, new technology, new usage patterns. And you have to do that without tearing down every time and starting over. And that's the architect's mental model. So let's talk about what this means for the CHRO role. Now, as we talked about, most CHROs, they know HR and they know it well. They also know recruiting numbers, engagement scores, retention rates, and L&D calendars. And look, all of those things matter, but they're the wrong level of question when you're in that seat. The architect's CHRO, they're asking completely different questions. Example, how does a compensation decision in HR ripple into sales retention and eventually end up on the P&L? They're asking, if we shift workforce planning model, what does that do to our cost structure and operations? And does that meet the projections that finance has for us to hit our KPI? And they're also evaluating how AI is affecting each stage of the organization. And speaking of AI, the architect mindset forces the CHRO to review the value of work and where it shows up in the process and which positions are responsible for it. They know to look beyond simple reorgs that make the organization flatter just for expense reasons. They're looking at how do we maximize the people, processes, and profit in the organization, and they're looking at it holistically. And the difference in this persona and this mindset is that this type of CHRO, they have an intimate knowledge of the organization as a system, not as a collection of departments. And what this requires is a very intimate knowledge of the organization as a system, understanding that everything touches and everything is impacted, even by the smallest decision. All right, let me break down what I call the 7 elements that I look for whenever I'm evaluating whether or not a CHRO is operating as an architect. All right, the first one is a constraint first design. A real architect doesn't start with just the pretty pictures. They start with what reality allows. And the architect CHRO, they do the same. So before designing any kind of people strategy, they ask, what are the regulatory constraints? What are the ethical lines around AI or the labor market realities? You design forward from constraint, not backwards from a wish list. And one of my guests on the podcast said that governance enables speed, it doesn't prevent it. And that's so incredibly important, especially when you're considering all of the activity around AI. All right, number 2 is judgment over knowledge. The thing that separates the elite CHROs from just the average ones is not what they know. It's the quality of their judgment under pressure. Where should AI augment human decision making and where should it not? How do you balance employee experience, cost reduction, and the risk when all three are pointing in very different directions? This requires judgment that only comes from operating at the business level and understanding the complexities of how each part of the organization is interconnected. All right, number 3 is meta architecture. Now, great architects, they design their own decision making process, not just the buildings. The architect CHRO does the same for the HR function. They move from team intuition based decisions to really looking at the evidence and the data and letting that lead their decisions. And they build agile governance for AI in the people processes. Now, as AI continues to force organizations to evolve, adaptability is really going to become one of the competitive advantages of organizations. And the architect CHRO, they have to know how to design the systems to enable adaptability while also maintaining structural integrity. All right, number 4 is system and lifecycle thinking. Now, remember, the architect, when they're designing a building, They have to think about the entire lifespan. And we're finding that the architect CHRO persona, they're doing the same thing. So they're not just looking at how do we get the workforce to get us through the end of the year. They're looking very long term, and it's becoming really, really hard with AI because it's changing the mix. If we look at it over the next 5 years, we will see new positions and new titles and even new skill sets and scope of responsibilities that we're not seeing today. It's exciting, but the planning for that actually begins today. So the architect CHRO is looking forward, but also looking into the present and designing those systems and those processes today. All right, five is stakeholder decision making processes. Now, I'm seeing a lot more CHROs reach across the table working with other departments, but I really think that this is more of a mindset than just, hey, this is how we do things to get along with others. Because an architect, it can't design alone. They need engineers, they need contractors, planning authorities, and the client, obviously. And the architect CHRO, they're going to build those cross functional teams, especially around AI and people decisions, because we're already seeing that HR and the CIO and CTO, they're almost becoming joined at the hip because of everything that's happening with AI. So the CHROs who skip the step of creating a cross functional team, they're actually creating a very significant risk for the organization. The ones who architect the process, they're the ones that are going to get the better outcomes. All right, number six is human centric design. Great architects, they design how people actually behave, not how they theoretically should. And the architect, CHRO, they use behavioral insight to ensure that AI tools actually get adopted. Because although AI is a tech revolution, it's also a people one. And the modern CHRO needs to know how to leverage this behavioral insight to unlock the talent within the organization. All right, and the last one is the architecture of intelligence. Now, this is probably the most forward leaning characteristic that I'm not seeing a lot of talk about in the CHRO scene. If you think about a great architect, they design flows of information and control it within the structure. The architect CHRO, they're going to do the same thing at the org level, orchestrating what I call a central nervous system. They're going to look at how human skills and workforce data, the AI models, and the business workflows, how they're all working together as one performance system. The future CHRO will be designing how the organization thinks, not just how it works. So if you compare the traditional description of the CHRO to what I'm describing in just one of the five personas of the modern CHRO, you can see that the job is going to become fundamentally different. And that's why I'm sounding the alarm. So here's what you can do with this. Three moves starting this week. Number one, draw the map. Take one major initiative that you're working on, not just an HR one, maybe one at an org level, and map all the different parts of the organization that it touches. This is going to help you identify how one decision can have a ripple effect throughout the organization. And if you can't draw that map, that's the gap that you need to close first. All right, number two, start with the constraints. Before the next strategy conversation, write down every constraint that's shaping your options, whether it's regulatory, financial, maybe even skill set, and start designing from there. Because you have to stop starting with what you want to build and start building with what you can actually do in reality. All right, and number three is get into that AI governance conversation now. If your organization is making decisions about AI in the workplace, you need to be the one that's architecting the process. This means proactively connecting with your CIO, CTO, and even your legal team, not to protect HR's turf, but to ensure that the AI decisions involving people are being made with the right inputs. That's an architect's job. And if you're not doing it, someone else is going to. So here's the bottom line on the architect persona within the CHRO role. It's no longer okay to just know about HR. It's about understanding the entire organization as a system, the interconnections, the constraints, the trade offs, and the long term structural implications of every decision that you're making today. And look, the data is clear. AI is moving fast, and the CHRO role is being redefined whether you are driving it or not. I really feel over the next several years, the CHROs that are going to keep their seat are the ones that are going to draw the blueprint for the entire organization, not just decorate one room. In the next episode, I'm going to go over the second persona, which is the engineer. If the architect understands how it's all connected, the engineer is obsessed with finding exactly where those connections are broken and closing the gaps. It's a different mindset, different skill set, and a different kind of value, but equally as important. Be sure to subscribe to the channel and follow the CHRO mini series playlist. And I'm also planning to create a playbook at the end of the series. So if you're interested in being one of the first to know when it drops, use the link in the description to sign up and you'll be the first to know. I am Trent Cotton, your human capitalist. Remember to invest in yourself because no one's going to do it quite like you do.